Common Sense Army. It is Wednesday, and on today's episode of the Why I'm Right podcast, we're breaking down the breaking news yesterday. Obviously, we all know about the DOJ, the weaponization of the DOJ, the weaponization of our judicial system in this country. We're now finding out the willingness and how far, the extent the Biden administration is willing to go to do everything in their power to hold on to their power. You don't want to miss this episode. This episode is critically important. This is the Why I'm Right podcast.
We live in a world filled with noise and confusion, clickbait, and outright lies in the media. But here, we cut through the clutter to find the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. This is Why I'm Right, the podcast where we dig deeper, ask the tough questions, and unravel the tangled webs of political and current events. Join us as we dissect the latest news, analyze political rhetoric, and challenge the narratives that dominate the mainstream discourse. We're not shy. From dissecting the motives behind policy decisions to uncovering the hidden agendas of public figures, it's what we do. It's time to think for ourselves. This is Why I'm Right. And now your unafraid and unapologetic host, Matt Taylor.
He is right. This is the Why I'm Right podcast. If this is your first episode here, welcome to the show. If you're already a member of the Common Sense Army, welcome back. As I say on every episode, we're growing the Common Sense Army one day at a time, one podcast at a time, and the one way you can help grow this mission is by clicking subscribe and sharing these videos with your friends, family, people who agree, and even more importantly, people who disagree, because the most important thing in our country is the ability for us to have free speech, free thought, and discourse, especially when we're talking about politics, because there is a divide in this nation and censorship efforts coming from one side of the aisle right now. And podcasts like this bring light to everything that's going on in this country. If you don't believe in the mainstream media and people are starting to flock from the mainstream media, these podcasts become so much more important because there is stuff going on in this country that isn't being covered. And we do everything in our power here at the Why I'm Right podcast to take the nuggets we get from the mainstream media and start piecing together the puzzle of life ourselves and start asking questions that many are afraid to ask. So make sure you click subscribe, share these videos, and let's continue to grow this together. Again, if you're already a member of the Common Sense Army, thank you. It means a lot. Let's dive into today's episode. Now, if you didn't see the breaking news yesterday, and it seems crazy that it's breaking news because we all know about the raid on Mar-a-Lago. We all know already before the news yesterday. Most people in this country, right, left, center, believe the raid on Mar-a-Lago was a problem, was problematic, was politically motivated, and that there were concerns whenever you're doing a raid on anyone, especially an FBI armed raid on a former president. There is obviously, and somebody who's running for office again, there is obviously problematic pieces of that puzzle. Well, we found out yesterday how far the problematic pieces actually go. If you didn't see the breaking news yesterday, it came out in leaked from the FBI, the ops plan for that Mar-a-Lago raid back in August. The ops plan was released. And it shows that Merrick Garland, the Attorney General of the United States of America in the Biden administration, this is coming from the top, approved the use of deadly force on the former president of the United States. Think about that for a second. It sounds absolutely crazy. But when you start looking around the country and you see charges in New York City, you see cases in New York City, you see cases and indictments in Georgia, you see cases and indictments in Florida, everything going on in this country, is this really surprising that we now are finding out that the Biden administration approved deadly force on his political opponent, the person who's potentially the next president of the United States, who was a former president, who's being surveilled and protected on a daily basis by the Secret Service today? You approved the use of deadly force from FBI agents on the raid on Mar-a-Lago. That's a problem, folks. And I don't care what anyone in the mainstream media tells you and tries to spin this saying it's somehow standard operating procedures. It's not standard. None of this is standard. I don't care what information you think you have. Quick little synopsis here. A former president of the United States has Secret Service protection when he is at his home or there's a raid being done at one of his houses in the country. Those areas are being protected by the Secret Service. If you're going to send in the FBI and tell them they're armed to the T's and they're able to shoot and have deadly force being used on a former president, and you say, quote, again, this is leaked from the FBI, quote, the FBI agents need to be prepared to engage with the former president and the Secret Service. Think about this. This is what's going on here in the United States where we're supposed to have a democracy. And what's crazy to me is there are Democrats and liberals right now in this country that'll see this story and think, again, this is a nothing burger. Again, this is not news. But you need to look at the bigger picture. This Biden administration for the last 4 years has told you that Donald Trump is the biggest threat to democracy our country has ever seen. The State of the Union address was spilled and spewed where Biden was drugged up on the stage spewing nonsense to the American people, saying the biggest threat to our country and our democracy is Donald Trump and white supremacists. Think about that administration. That same administration that has used every bit of their power, every bit of their political power, every bit of their actual power as the president, as the DOJ, as the FBI, as the CIA to spy on this guy, to charge him in the courts, to corrupt the judicial system in this country. And now we're finding out the extent that the Biden administration is willing to go. They were prepared, and they prepared the FBI to go in there and assassinate the president, the former president of the United States. And that sounds crazy. It sounds ludicrous. But when you look around the country right now, and you see the spectacle going on in New York City, where this Stormy Daniels case was now brought up out of thin air, where Alvin Bragg wouldn't charge, the previous AG in New York City wouldn't charge, the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, who again, supposedly, this transaction, this business transaction of the NDA violated the FEC's rules and regulations. The governing body, the FEC, they said this was not a crime. You see what's going on in this country right now. You see them charging him in Georgia. You see them charging him in New York City. You see them going after him with the E. Jean Carroll case. You see them going after them with the fraud case in New York City. You see the raid on Mar-a-Lago. You see the charges in Florida. Think about what's going on. And average everyday people are looking at this, and when you start looking at the extent that the Biden administration and the willingness of this Biden administration right now to do everything in their power, to use every bit of their power to hold on to power, it seems ludicrous. It seems asinine. It seems psychotic. And frankly, we're at a point in this country where the party in power today, the man sitting in the Oval Office today, tells you, lies to you, the American people, saying the biggest threat to our democracy is Donald J. Trump, while at the same time that guy, that party, that administration is weaponizing our judicial system, weaponizing the DOJ, and now we're finding out that they were willing to use deadly force on a former president in the United States, his political opponent, at his home in Mar-a-Lago, in Florida. They were willing to use deadly force. And anyone that's on mainstream media telling you this is any kind of standard operating procedures knows nothing. Nothing about anything going on in this country right now is standard. Nothing's an SOP. These are not standard operating procedures in any kind of means by our FBI, any kinds of means of our DOJ, any kind of means from the Attorney General. Nothing is standard right now. And don't believe me. The FBI has come out now and said, hey, the AG, Merrick Garland, he actually overruled us We didn't want to do this raid in Mar-a-Lago. We didn't want to raid Mar-a-Lago. We didn't want to do this raid on a former president. Why? Why wouldn't they want to raid the former president? Again, simple. This guy has Secret Service protection, meaning anyone that shows up to Mar-a-Lago, the Secret Service is aware of it. Anything going on at Mar-a-Lago, the Secret Service has it covered. You didn't have to. You didn't have to raid Mar-a-Lago. I think everyone, left, right, and center, understands, left, right, and center, that this was a politically motivated raid. And now we're finding out the extent of that raid, how far they were willing to go to potentially assassinate a former president over a documents case. Again, and I've said this numerous times on this podcast, Joe Biden, the president, the same guy that's orchestrating all of these things around the country right now, he had classified documents at his house in Delaware before he was president. And they just got them back recently. And the difference here is Donald Trump, the president or former president, had, when he was the president of the United States, he had the power to classify and unclassify documents at any point in time. He could say, this is a classified document. Hold on. Actually, I changed my mind. Not a classified document. I'm declassifying this. Joe Biden never had the power, ever, when he was in Congress, when he was vice president. He never had any kind of power to classify or unclassify documents. He had these classified documents at his house, in his garage, next to his Corvette. And again, no one raided his house. There weren't armed guards showing up at his house. There wasn't an armed FBI raid on his house saying that you have the authority to shoot to kill. You have the authority to use deadly force. The quote in this FBI leaked ops was, quote, law enforcement officials of the Department of Justice may use deadly force when necessary. End quote. The FBI needs to be prepared to engage with the former president and the Secret Service security team. Think about where we're really going in this country. And as I said, it's comical. The same person that sits there at the State of the Union address and spews to you, the American people, tells you, the American people, that the biggest threat to democracy is the other guy. The guy that we're going to weaponize the Department of Justice to go after, who we're going to raid his house with armed guards, armed FBI agents, send them to his house where he has his family. He has guests that have nothing to do. Again, Mar-a-Lago is a private club. There were people staying at Mar-a-Lago when this raid happened that had nothing to do with any of this classified documents. Anything to do with the Trump administration. Anything to do with Donald Trump. You're going to risk the lives of Americans, the lives of Donald Trump, the lives of Donald Trump's family, anyone at Mar-a-Lago. And as I said, at the same time they did this raid on Mar-a-Lago, the same exact time, the Trump administration, the former Trump administration, was already in talks to give up the documents to the U.S. government, hand in the documents to the U.S. government. And again, we still don't know if Trump classified or unclassified the documents. This may not even be a classified documents case. If Trump unclassified documents, we have no idea what Trump did or didn't do, especially prior to the raid. They had no idea at all if these documents were classified or not. But yet, they're willing to send in armed FBI agents who have the authority to shoot to kill on a former president in the United States of America, to use deadly force when necessary. People need to wake up. And as I said, this comes from the very top in the White House. This is coming from Joe Biden himself. Don't believe me? Because this is his Attorney General, Merrick Garland, saying this to the American people, again, saying, I'm the one that authorized this raid. Here's Merrick Garland. Listen to this.
There are, however, certain points I want you to know. First, I personally approved the decision to seek a search warrant in this matter. Second, the department does not take such a decision lightly.
That's Merrick Garland. First, I personally approved. He personally approved this raid on Mar-a-Lago. He knew everything that was in this ops. Again, we're going to go on and tell you and show you so you could hear for yourself, not from me at all. Again, we come with the facts here, and we showcase the facts that, again, you're not seeing on mainstream news. You're not seeing this on CNN, MSNBC, NBC, ABC. You're not seeing any of this. They're trying to pull this off saying this is standard operating procedures. None of this is standard operating procedures whatsoever. Don't believe me? Again, here's another clip. This is Senator Hawley asking and talking to Merrick Garland under oath, talking about how the FBI was overruled on this raid. Again, there's supposed to be a balance of power in our U.S. government where this kind of stuff can't happen. This kind of weaponization can't happen. We don't want former presidents, whether they're Democrat, Republican, we don't want former presidents being in situations like this. That's why we give them Secret Service after they're in office. If once they serve, we didn't care about them. Again, if once they served, we didn't care about the president, the former president, why do we pay using taxpayer dollars to protect them using Secret Service? This guy, Donald Trump, is another former president. And just because you don't like his policies doesn't mean you could start weaponizing the DOJ to go after this guy. Listen to this. This is Senator Hawley going back and forth in Congress, talking to Merrick Garland about this raid and talking about how Merrick Garland, the Attorney General of the United States, overruled the FBI with this raid. Here's Senator Hawley and Merrick Garland.
Garland, you said in our last exchange that it's your practice to defer to FBI agents in the field when it comes to investigations, apprehensions of subjects. I was interested, given your answer, to read in this morning's Washington Post that the FBI is saying that you overruled them when it came to raiding ex-President Trump's personal residence. Washington Post reports this morning, showdown before the raid, that senior FBI officials who would be in charge of leading the search resisted doing so as too combative and proposed instead to seek Trump's permission to search his property. These field agents wanted to shutter the criminal investigation altogether in early June, the Post reports, but they were overruled by Maine DOJ. So I guess in light of your earlier testimony just this morning, my question is, how often do you overrule FBI field agents for political purposes?
You hear it there. And I'm going to get you the answer. I wanted to cut it off there for a second before he answers and gives some, again, political nonsense of an answer. I'm going to play it so you could hear his answer to that. But think about that for a second. The FBI said, we don't want to raid Trump. We should ask permission to go to Donald Trump's house. Again, this area that Donald Trump's at his own residence, his residence that he lives at, this area is under the protection of the Secret Service. And if we go in there arms blazing, guns blazing, there could be a blue on blue war. And when I say blue on blue, I'm talking about people who are sworn in to protect different entities of our government. The FBI, the police in this country, are at the direction of the Department of Justice, while the Secret Service is sworn to protect Donald Trump. And when you send them in to the former president's residence to do a armed raid where you're telling them that they, quote, have the use of they may use deadly force when necessary and, quote, prepared to engage with former president and Secret Service security team, you're setting this up for a constitutional nightmare. A clash between the people that are protecting our country and different elements. Like I said, our government is not perfect. Again, far from perfect. But the way it was set up by our founding fathers and by the Constitution and our founding documents is so that there's a balance of power so that when this kind of stuff happens, it doesn't happen. Well, guess what? That's only true if when the FBI says to the Attorney General, hey, we probably shouldn't do this, This is a bad idea. This is a stupid idea. This is going to get someone hurt, someone killed. This could cause, again, a civil war. I know that sounds wild in this country, but think about this. What if the FBI went there and they did happen to hurt somebody? Whether it's Donald Trump's kid, Barron Trump, 17-year-old Barron Trump at the time, probably 16 years old. Whether it was Melania Trump, the former First Lady of the United States, whether it was Donald Trump himself, the former President of the United States, or if it was somebody who was just staying at Donald Trump's property at Mar-a-Lago. What if someone got hurt at this rate? And don't think that that sounds crazy. Again, it doesn't sound crazy when in the same leaked ops plan from the FBI, they brought paramedics to this raid in case something were to happen, something were to go out of line, something were to happen out of control, where there was a clash between the FBI and Secret Service, where former President Trump was shot because they had the authority to shoot to kill. They had the authority to use deadly force. This is craziness at its finest. And when we find out that the FBI was telling the Attorney General, we don't want to do this, and they were being combative with the Attorney General, with the DOJ, with Main Justice, as you just heard, it shows you the extent that the Biden administration and the extent of the Attorney General and the extent of all of this lawfare around the country, they were willing to do something where the FBI was saying, we shouldn't do this. We shouldn't do this. This is crazy. Here's Garland's reaction.
Garland, you said in our last exchange that it's your practice to defer to FBI agents in the field when it comes to investigations, apprehensions of subjects. I was interested, given your answer, to read in this morning's Washington Post that the FBI is saying that you overruled them when it came to raiding ex-President Trump's personal residence. Washington Post reports this morning, showdown before the raid, that senior FBI officials who would be in charge of leading the search resisted doing so as too combative and proposed instead to seek Trump's permission to search his property. These field agents wanted to shutter the criminal investigation altogether in early June, the Post reports, but they were overruled by Maine DOJ. So I guess in light of your earlier testimony just this morning, my question is, how often do you overrule FBI field agents for political purposes? Your FBI officials who would be in charge of leading the search resisted the plan as too combative and proposed instead to seek Trump's permission to seek his property, according to 4 people who spoke on condition of anonymity to describe a sensitive investigation, end quote.
Again, I have to say I'm not able to describe the investigation. I will say as a general matter and at a high level of generality, that in my experience, long experience as a prosecutor, there is often a robust discussion, and in the end, and it's encouraged among investigators and prosecutors.
Attorney General, my time is very
made.
Yes, and you made the decision.
I did. That's
right. You said you did.
No, I'm sorry. What I said was I approved the decision.
So
You see what he did there at the end? Wordplay. I played you the clip earlier. Merrick Garland was the one that stood there and said, I'm the one. I personally approved this mission. I personally made this decision. We now know that the FBI was saying we probably shouldn't do this. We should seek permission from the former president to go onto his property to do this. Again, when the FBI raided Hunter Biden, they gave him fair warning. And they didn't have to come guns blazing, because there was at least a communication. This guy, Donald Trump, a former president of the United States, has Secret Service protection. You could have coordinated this in a way that was peaceful, in a way that wasn't going to harm anybody or potentially harm anybody to the point where you had to have paramedics on site. You could have done so many different things. But in my opinion, this whole stunt that they did by raiding a former president's home, personal residence, I said it earlier. I said it about 2 months ago. That was the warning shot over the bow of Donald Trump that if you run for president, if you're doing this, we're going to use every bit of our power we have, power we don't have, and we're going to go after you. We're going to go after you in the courts. We're going to go after you personally. We're going to go after your family, your businesses. your allies, we're going to go after anyone that believes anything. And I said this so many times. You look at what they've done with the people that went to on January 6th. There are people that overstepped a line on January 6th, and they should be prosecuted and they should be held accountable. I want to be very clear when I'm talking about this. People that broke the law on January 6th and people who went there not to peacefully protest, people who went there to do different things, they should be prosecuted. But there are people being prosecuted or have been prosecuted in this country who are elderly women in their 90s who went there on January 6th because they believed the election was stolen. They went there on January 6th. They went there to peacefully protest, and things did get out of control on January 6th. And again, I'll be very clear. People who were out of control, people who violated the law, people who were promoting violence, people who were on there for the wrong reasons, they should be prosecuted. But the other people who are being prosecuted just for being there, just for walking through an open door, there are plenty of cases, the video footage has been leaked, where people were just walking through the door. They didn't do anything wrong. They thought this was fine. And they're being prosecuted to the fullest extent. Jail time. Long-term jail time for a grandma who was just on January 6th again because they believed the election had some irregularities that needed to be looked into before we certified an election, which now, I've said it last week, we're now finding out in Georgia that they are still missing 380 plus thousand ballots. They still can't find them today. But yet, we certified the election. There is so much going on in this country, and if you don't see the political motivation, the political weaponization from this Biden administration, I can't help you. It comes to a point where liberals are either very stupid, which I don't believe. I really don't believe. I think there's more people in this country who have common sense. One of two things has to be true. Either some of these liberals who don't see the politicalization of this issue are either insanely incompetent or they're lying. They know it's wrong. They know it's being weaponized. They see the lawfare in the country. They see what they're doing to Donald Trump. They're seeing the charges in Georgia. They're seeing the charges in New York City. Again, charges in this Stormy Daniels case from 7.5 years ago that are being brought in an election year when it already passed the statute of limitations, being brought in an election year, getting approvals to go beyond the statute of limitation on a crime. They're seeing it for what it is. That's why Trump's poll numbers only get better, because more people, the more they do this kind of stuff and the more they start showing their hand, more people are waking up to, hey, maybe the person that is telling me the other guy is the threat to democracy, while they weaponize every element of power in this country, in the history of this country, they're weaponizing almost every piece of element of power they don't have to go after one guy. Maybe that guy is the person that's a threat to democracy. And so as we move forward on the Why I'm Right podcast, we're going to continue down this path. I had to have a shorter episode today because I wanted you to see this for what it is. The FBI, the DOJ, the Attorney General of the United States, the president in the Oval Office today, this is a fact, approved the use of deadly force on a former president and a political opponent for political reasons. And you can't tell me any of this is standard operating procedures. None of it is standard operating procedures. You have a Secret Service protectee who has Secret Service protection, and you authorize the use of deadly force on his personal residence over classified documents when we know Joe Biden has classified documents, had classified documents at his residence. This is craziness, madness, and an abomination on our own democracy. So when they say that Donald Trump is the biggest threat to democracy, you need to be aware and see for yourself the willingness and the extent Joe Biden and his administration is willing to go to hold on to power that they shouldn't have. And so as we move forward on the Why I'm Right podcast, again, we have many more episodes coming out this week. make sure you visit us. If you want to ask me a question, all you got to do is go to www.whyimrightpodcast.com. Send me an email at matt@whyimrightpodcast. If you go to the website, scroll to the bottom, there's a section there, ask a question. You could type any question. I respond to every single email I get. And as we move forward, again, if you want me to address a specific issue, you have a specific question, I'll address it. We can have the conversation. If you want to be on the Why I'm Right podcast, again, I'm open to have debate with people who disagree because I think that's the most important element of our country right now. So as we move forward on the Why I'm Right podcast, I hope you guys have a great Wednesday, a great rest of your week. We'll be back tomorrow. This is the Why I'm Right podcast, and I just told you why I'm right.
You've been listening to Why I'm Right. Thanks for being a part of the Common Sense Army. Our passion is to cut through the noise and confusion and to bring light to clickbait and outright lies in the media. Unafraid, unapologetic, real and raw. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on Instagram at Why I'm Right, on X at Why I'm Right Pod. And for more, hit the website at www.whyimrightpodcast.com. See you next time.